In the end, a gun is coldly put to the head of one of them and fired with fatal consequences, and the confession comes to an end.
A long line of witnesses appeared in the Eastern District Court of New York to testify in the trial against the former Secretary of Public Security, Genaro Garcia Luna. They all testified the same thing. The accused had cooperated with the Sinaloa cartel during his years as the protector of the security of Mexicans. Cooperation in drug trafficking, protection of dangerous drug lords, and information about rival groups. Those were just some of the tasks that Genaro Garcia Luna carried out while he filled his pockets with millions in bribes. Although the former official's defense denied these accusations at all times, claiming there was supposedly no evidence of this. The authorities had a secret video that allegedly exposed the connection that Genaro Garcia Luna had with Edgar Valdez Villarreal, also known as La Barbie, and how he was at the service of the powerful Sinaloa cartel during the first decade of the 2000s.
I was in the Mexican army and spent 8 months as a hitman.
Tortured, beaten, with fresh blood still on their faces and their hands tied, they confess in front of their executioners.
From his peculiar nickname, which reflects his anxious and obsessive personality, to the drug trafficking charges that have him in prison today. The story of Garcia Luna is an example of the duality of power in Mexico, where the figures who promise security are often involved in the very crimes they swear to fight. But what were the crimes of Genaro Garcia Luna? What did that disturbing video contain that could have changed the course of Mexico if it had been taken into account? Let me tell you about this video. On May 16, 2005, when the so-called war against the Narco had not yet begun, the port of Acapulco was not only the scene of a horrific event, but also of the first damage that narco politics was leaving in Mexico. He arrived at the popular port in Guerrero from Nuevo Laredo, Tamaulipas a few days earlier. Juan Miguel Vizcarra, a former soldier who had planned to spend a vacation with his girlfriend Norma and their little 2-year-old daughter, which at first Norma thought would be a memorable family getaway. Little by little, she began to doubt that everything was really just a facade. Her partner began to behave strangely, constantly having meetings with mysterious men during the nights they stayed at the port. He never went to the beach with his family. In fact, he forbade Norma and her daughter from leaving the hotel. Then, unable to bear Vizcarra's silence any longer, Norma confronted him and demanded an explanation of what was really going on. Although at first the man refused to confess the truth, on the morning of May 15th, everything changed. A suspicious phone call alerted Juan Miguel Vizcarra about what was coming for him and his family, and with nerves on edge and undeniable pressure, the former soldier was forced to confess to his girlfriend that he had resigned from his military position to take on a new occupation. Nothing more and nothing less than being the chief of hitmen, not just for any group, but for Los Zetas. And he commanded people in Acapulco and Zihuatanejo, whom he coordinated to carry out the difficult and dangerous mission of taking control of the state of Guerrero from the Beltran-Leiva cartel.
The individuals reportedly belonged to Los Zetas, the armed wing of the Gulf Cartel.
Vizcarra told Norma to pack quickly, that they had to flee the hotel as soon as possible, because their allies had been caught in Zihuatanejo, which meant that the Sinaloa cartel was hot on their heels. Vizcarra tried to flee Acapulco with his girlfriend and daughter in his vehicle. However, near Papagayo Park, 3 unlicensed trucks blocked his way, and from these about 10 armed men got out, wearing uniforms with 3 letters on them: Federal Investigation Agency, which stands for Federal Investigation Agency. At that time, it was Genaro Garcia Luna who was serving as the head of that agency. Vizcarra was deprived of his freedom and taken to a property belonging to the Sinaloa cartel, along with his family, a safe house owned by La Barbie. At that time, he was the plaza boss for the Sinaloa cartel in Guerrero and was in charge of confronting the war that Chapo Guzman and Mayo Zambada launched against Los Zetas.
I am a recruiter for Los Zetas, and there are 3 recruitment points, which are Monterrey, Nuevo Laredo, and Monterrey.
Norma and her little daughter were released, luckily, one day after the kidnapping. But Juan Miguel Vizcarra and 3 other members of Los Zetas, identified as Sergio Alberto Ramon, Andres Tamares, and Edgar Ortiz, were not as lucky. Their executioners filmed all the suffering. In it, you can see the 4 members of Los Zetas staring directly at the camera held by La Barbie.
They confess to their executioners how they get rid of people who get in the way of their shady business.
They appear visibly beaten and with a couple of black plastic sheets protecting the walls from this vital liquid. The four Zetas are interrogated about their methods for disposing of their victims' bodies.
They grab someone and get information out of them, whether they were moving drugs or money or something like that. They take whatever they want, whatever the crime brings, and after torturing them, they execute them.
After fully interrogating them, the firing of a gun at the temple of Juan Miguel and his three partners marked the end of their lives, and of the recording that the Sinaloa Cartel later sent anonymously to the then Attorney General's office for distribution.
And when they think someone is in their way or is no longer useful to them, they simply make them disappear.
However, the Mexican government refused to make the raw video public, so members of organized crime took it upon themselves to send it to two United States media outlets, which quickly picked up the story and exposed the alleged ties that Mexican authorities had with criminal organizations. In response to the scandal sparked by the video, the federal government had to hold a press conference, led by Jose Luis Santiago Vasconcelos, who at that time was the Deputy Attorney General for Specialized Investigation of Organized Crime. The official admitted that 11 agents from the Federal Investigation Agency served as kidnappers for the Sinaloa Cartel.
At the press conference, it was stated that the alleged perpetrators of these videos are members of the Federal Investigation Agency. 8 people have been arrested so far.
For his part, Genaro Garcia Luna was at that time the head of that agency. And despite that incident, a year later he became, because yes, in this magical Mexico anything can happen, he became the head of the Public Security Secretariat, in other words, the top chief of the Mexican police. A later investigation revealed, in fact, that since that year, 2005, the Mexican authorities, including former presidents Vicente Fox and Felipe Calderón, already knew that the municipal and federal police were deeply involved with organized crime, specifically with the Sinaloa Cartel. These corrupt federal agents had taken it upon themselves to capture 4 hitmen from the Los Zetas group to hand them over directly to the Sinaloa Cartel. And the scandal was huge, as you can imagine, federal agents working for the drug cartels. However, the authorities did not make the case public. Not until December 2005, when the American newspapers Kitsap Sun and Dallas Morning News revealed the videos of the interrogations and the suffering, and how they take out these 4 Zetas. More than 7 months after the crime, the then Deputy Attorney General for Special Investigations on Organized Crime, this person I'm telling you about, named Jose Luis Santiago Vasconcelos, came out to declare that the Zafis involved were traitors.
The reach of the narcos tentacles that infiltrate the police, the government, private enterprise, and even the media.
Despite the magnitude of the scandal, Genaro Garcia Luna's power allowed him to retain his position, and so that the name of the Federal Investigation Agency and his own would no longer be under scrutiny, he offered the public the most famous of all his media shows. The arrest, falsely portrayed as caught in the act of the Frenchwoman Florence Cassez and her ex-boyfriend Israel Vallarta Cisneros, a case that served as a distraction to cover up the other scandal.
Another reporter also had his daughters kidnapped.
Which reporter?
At least 5 agents from the Federal Investigation Agency who participated in the kidnapping and execution of Los Zetas were brought to trial. No high-ranking Federal Investigation Agency official was investigated, as if agents acted alone. Magical Mexico. But who was Genaro Garcia Luna and how much power did he have? He was known in Mexico's circles of power for his peculiar way of acting and speaking, nicknamed the machine gun or the submachine gun, both by his fellow police officers and within the payroll of the Sinaloa Cartel. One might think it referred to his powerful figure as a super cop. However, this nickname comes from his particular way of speaking, fast and confusing, which reflected a racing mind that outpaced his ability to express ideas clearly. The stutterer, as he was also called, showed through this constant speech impediment his nervousness and his fear of making mistakes. This fear then led him to obsessive practices, such as reading aloud, repeating phrases over and over, and attending speech therapy to improve his communication skills. He practiced his speeches obsessively because he was terrified of getting stuck in the middle of a sentence. And despite these difficulties, Garcia Luna managed to establish himself in Mexico's security sphere, as I told you, particularly during his time at the Center for Investigation and National Security, where many in fact described him as an ambitious man but also reserved and calculating. He preferred to avoid arguments or confrontations, choosing to flatter his superiors and remain silent with his subordinates. And when he spoke, he did so with a close circle of people, limiting his words in front of those he did not fully trust. Yes, sir, of course, we absolutely do. Those were the phrases he typically used or said automatically when dealing with his superiors, and they reflected his eagerness to please and fulfill what was asked of him without causing confrontations. Thus, throughout his career at the National Research and Security Center, he volunteered for the most dangerous missions, hoping to be recognized by his superiors and to get promoted. Garcia Luna was a tenacious man who did not shy away from danger.
In his early years at the National Research and Security Center,
he was in charge of monitoring the activities of the guerrilla groups active in Mexico, specializing in fighting kidnapping gangs. And he even managed to rescue several important figures, especially businessmen who years later helped him in his government career. And he always remained firm in his desire to stand out until finally his career took off. With his involvement in the fight against Zapatismo in Chiapas during the 90s, Garcia Luna quickly rose through the ranks of Mexico's public security and intelligence agencies. He transitioned from the Center for Investigation and National Security to the now-defunct Federal Preventive Police and subsequently to the Federal Investigation Agency. By the way, when Garcia Luna took charge of the Public Security Secretariat starting in 2006, and as Secretary of Public Security during Felipe Calderón's administration, he was one of the main people responsible for the strategy against drug trafficking. Garcia Luna advanced the war on drug trafficking, which involved the army and, according to some estimates, left more than 252 people dead in Mexico. It was during the 2000s that he was also a key figure in Mexico's security strategy in the fight against crime. Garcia Luna moved to Florida, United States of America around 2012 at the end of Calderón's administration. And so as he accumulated more power, suspicions also began to arise about his ties to organized crime. These accusations were not taken seriously. Not until years later, when it was discovered that Garcia Luna, who swore to fight drug trafficking, had allegedly accepted millions of dollars in bribes from the Sinaloa cartel. After more than 6 years away from public office, he was arrested in 2019 in the North American country where he was living and was charged with 5 counts related to drug trafficking. But what was his administration like alongside Felipe Calderón? The efforts of Felipe Calderón's government to confront drug trafficking were based on a strategy of militarization in the country. He needed in his ranks 2 men trusted by the then Mexican president, one of them Attorney General Eduardo Medina, the other Genaro García Luna, appointed Secretary of Public Security. The decision of the then head of the executive was to renew the police force, and to lead the organization, he entrusted the task to Genaro García Luna, who at that time was not even 40 years old. However, Felipe didn't know Garcia Luna very well, but he had managed to sell himself very skillfully and make himself known as an expert in public security. So the president didn't hesitate to place his trust in him, despite the existence of speculations about his ties to criminal organizations involved in drug trafficking. And that's how Garcia Luna moved forward with a successful strategy such as the transformation of the Federal Preventive Police and the increase in the number of police officers, just to mention a few. And he also became the favored son, who apparently collaborated in guaranteeing public security for the nation. But this war led to more than 200,000 people losing their lives, and thus the then modern story of drug trafficking and violence began to take shape. Homicides increased by nearly 100%, criminal groups split up, new cartels appeared that were much more violent and bloodthirsty, and there were wars between former allies. All of this happened with the complicity of public officials linked to organized crime, obviously. So, during the administration of Felipe Calderón, violence became normalized and apocalyptic scenarios were created to justify the use of the armed forces in the fight against organized crime, no matter the cost. An example of this were the massacres in Boca del Rio, Veracruz, and Guadalajara, Jalisco, which left 35 and 26 victims respectively in the year 2011. And at the time it was said that they were part of the war between Los Zetas and Los Matachetas. The grenade attacks in Michoacan also happened, which were pointed out as the beginning of narco-terrorism during the Independence Day celebrations in 2008. And there were no arrests, as you can probably imagine. And the official statements led by Felipe Calderón and Genaro García Luna tried to portray the victims as members of the cartel. Collateral damage, that would become one of the former president's famous phrases years later. However, a journalistic investigation confirmed that they were actually pizza delivery men, a moving truck driver, a painter, a hamburger vendor, and a mechanic, among other people who had been kidnapped days before the massacres.
Systematic violations of human rights. Civilians murdered at military and police checkpoints, executions, arrests without a warrant, raids, and the climate of terror that they have been imposing in the country.
So Genaro García Luna was in charge of implementing the strategy, which in reality focused on attacking the enemies of the Sinaloa cartel in exchange for millions of dollars. It was precisely the war between drug cartels that broke out in 2006 between the Sinaloa cartel and Los Zetas, and then in 2008 between the Sinaloa cartel against the Beltran Leyva brothers and the Juarez cartel. In all of them, well, we already know that the Sinaloans won thanks to Garcia Luna. But it wasn't just the collaboration with the drug traffickers that made this war on drugs a big farce by the government. The television shows, the multiple arrests where many were later released, and the media propaganda about attacks and assaults allegedly orchestrated by drug traffickers, when many of them were actually carried out by the law enforcement forces themselves, disguised as criminals.
Because they have been imposing this in the country to divert attention from economic, political, and social problems.
Felipe Calderón's war on drugs was exactly that. The creation of a public strategy that left millions of Mexican men and women defenseless, caught in a wave of violence from which they could not protect themselves. But Garcia Luna insisted that this did not start with that government and that the deaths attributed to it were based on incorrect and malicious information. In recent days, a comment by Felipe Calderón was described as cynical by the President of Mexico, Claudia Sheinbaum, because the former president claimed that during his term it was indeed possible to fight crime and organized crime. But the ironic thing was that he made this comment just a few days before the sentencing for ties to drug traffickers of the man who served as his Secretary of Security during his administration, Genaro García Luna. And that's how, after his arrest in 2019, he was brought to trial in 2023. The trial of Garcia Luna was preceded by another one in the same court, before the same Judge Cogar, against Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, ex-Sinaloa cartel leader, sentenced to life in 2019.
You are a coward. Here in the chamber, I repeat that you are a murderer, and I will report you to the office of the Attorney General.
During the trial, there were testimonies linking Garcia Luna to the activities of this cartel when he was Secretary of Public Security. A former cartel member testified that he was responsible for delivering suitcases to Garcia Luna, with at least 6,000,009 pesos in cash dollars in 2005, 2006, and 2007. Prosecutors alleged that he accepted the money to facilitate the entry of tons of white gold. Guzman's cartel brought this substance into the United States between 2001 and 2012. There was also testimony from former high-ranking members of the Sinaloa cartel who revealed that in exchange for bribes, the defendants' federal police acted as bodyguards and escorts for the cartel, allowing its members to use police uniforms and badges. And they helped unload shipments of white gold from planes at Mexico City's airport, then delivered them to the cartel. The defendant received payments, I repeat, in United States dollars kept in various forms, suitcases, briefcases, and duffel bags. The amounts of the bribes increased over the years as the Sinaloa cartel grew in size and power, thanks to the help of the defendant. And the bribes had also been delivered at a safe house in Mexico City, where large amounts of cash were hidden in a false wall. A car wash in Guadalajara and a French restaurant in Mexico City across from the United States Embassy.
I can go up to the podium and say that Garcia Luna is a murderer, and I'm saying it to his face, so there's no act of cowardice here.
I'm backing it up with evidence, with proof, and with arguments, and I'm saying it to him directly.
In addition, in exchange for the millions of dollars that the accused received in bribes, the federal police under his command leaked confidential information that allowed the cartel to evade detection by the authorities or use it in attacks against rival drug traffickers. The prosecutor's office stated that Garcia Luna agreed to allow drug shipments and disclose information about control operations to traffickers, eliminate members of rival cartels, and place other corrupt officials in positions of power. According to the accusation, Garcia Luna became a member of the organization in January 2001, and when he took charge of the Federal Investigation Agency, it became an armed wing of the Sinaloa cartel. Apparently, because he was in charge of their protection, both of the members and the goods they were moving to the United States. During that period, Ismael El Mayo Zambada, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, and Arturo Beltran Leiva, they enjoyed total impunity from the authorities because they carried out their drug trafficking operations and were still protected by the Federal Investigation Agency. Moreover, El Mayo Zambada wanted Norberto Vigueras Beltran to become the regional chief of the Federal Investigation Agency in Culiacan, so he would have given Garcia Luna a large amount of money to make this request a reality. That's how he received $3 million, which he handed over personally. Can you imagine how many millions does this man have, or did he have up until now? How many have we counted? About 10? Well, okay. And that's how, through big bribes, El Mayo got what he wanted from Vigueras Beltran, who had worked in the Federal Investigation Agency, formerly the Judicial Police, since 1986 and was in Hidalgo. And during Garcia Luna's term, they transferred him as regional chief to Culiacan, where he was from 2003 to 2006. The drug lord had the regional chief of the Federal Investigation Agency in his pocket and sent him to Durango, another territory controlled by El Mayo and the Sinaloa cartel, where he served from 2006 to 2011. In his trial, Garcia Luna faced 5 charges, 3 for drug trafficking conspiracy, 1 for continuous membership in a criminal organization, and another for making false statements to United States authorities when he applied for citizenship in that country in 2018. And so, the Secretary of Public Security in Felipe Calderon's government became the highest-ranking former Mexican official to face United States justice on charges of drug trafficking and corruption.
He is a murderer. He is linked to drug trafficking, to El Chapo Guzman's group. He is one of the worst and most dangerous criminals in the country.
There were 7 women and 5 men who were responsible for deciding the innocence or guilt of the former Chief of Police of Mexico. And by order of the judge, the jury was anonymous and remained partially isolated. Each one had to answer basic questions about their identity, their ethnicity, their profession, and any information that could influence the verdict. The protection was due to the ongoing violence, and the wide reach of the Sinaloa cartel caused the jury members to fear for their safety if anonymity was not guaranteed. And so, during the trial of El Chapo Guzman, the jury was also anonymous and partially isolated. So while the United States Department of Justice requested Judge Brian Cogan to sentence the former official to life imprisonment and a $5 million fine, Garcia Luna's defense requested that their client be sentenced to 20 years in prison. However, their request was ignored. The man who was once considered the most powerful in the fight against organized crime will spend a long time in prison. Genaro García Luna was sentenced to 38 years and 8 months in prison in the United States for his involvement with drug trafficking. In addition, he must pay a fine of $2 million. He was then transferred to one of the maximum security prisons in the United States, popularly known as the Hole, a place that has a history of denying privileges to inmates, violating prison regulations. In fact, in a letter written after the sentence, Garcia Luna lamented that the prosecution did not present a single piece of evidence or proof to support the crimes for which he was convicted. He also defended his legacy, stating that his honor is intact and that he had not committed any crime. Do you believe him? Well, leave your answer in the comments, but we're not done yet. However, the United States justice system did not agree with this. Genaro García Luna will leave prison on August 8, 2052. By then, if the former Secretary of Public Security, aged 94, makes it, will he have one foot in the grave or both? Who knows? But anyway, in the end, Garcia Luna, who was once at the top of the law in Mexico, will spend the rest of his days behind bars after being revealed as a traitor to his country And to all those honest members of law enforcement who risked their lives to dismantle the drug cartels that he himself was running.
How is it possible that people know where the criminals are, know where the drug traffickers are, know if there are safe houses, know where El Chapo Guzman moves around?
Genaro Garcia Luna betrayed his duty as Secretary of Public Security by accepting millions of dollars in bribes. Stained with the blood of the war between cartels and the drug-related clashes in the streets of the United States and Mexico in exchange for protecting these criminals and drug traffickers he swore to catch.
When Calderon says he's going to catch Chapo, he'll catch him by the hand because he's his accomplice.
The conclusion of all this is that criminal organizations cannot operate at the level of the Sinaloa cartel without the support of politicians and corrupt officials like Genaro Garcia Luna, a public servant who used his official position to help this violent cartel in exchange for millions of dollars in bribes.
In the end, drug traffickers govern. They have always existed, but there used to be controls, deals, and agreements that allowed them to negotiate among themselves without affecting the city.
Garcia Luna betrayed his position, people, and country. And the worst part is that back in 2005, there was a moment of hope when that disturbing video came out. That, if it had fallen into the right hands of some politician who wasn't corrupt, because I hope there are still some left, it could have prevented years of deaths under the rule of drug trafficking and its allies. But the saddest thing is that another country had to come and bring justice to put this person in jail. Otherwise, nothing would have happened in Mexico. And well, let's hope that just like this one, more people keep getting caught and that someday a former president of Mexico gets caught too, of course.